Well, hello once again and welcome to Outwith, the podcast that takes you beyond the headlines and beyond our borders. I'm Hala Mohyuddin. Now, here in the UK, where I'm based, political turmoil has been something of a reality for the last few years. We've had referendums, especially in Scotland, referendums, general elections, Scottish Parliament elections. We're having talks of leadership battles, governments in crises, oppositions in crises, political chaos, and governments on the brink of collapse. It's something that we're growing quite accustomed to here. It's almost our new reality. Very hard to keep up with developments at times, but are we alone in this chaos? Perhaps not. Today we're going to head down under and talk about Australia, where they're on their second Prime Minister this year so far, I believe. In fact, 4 political leaders have been ousted by their party in a decade, which seems it's almost slightly more turbulent than what's going on here in the UK. To find out what's going on, I'm joined by Christian Edwards, who's an Australian journalist based in Sydney. Chris, welcome to Outwith.
Hi, Hala. It's good to be here.
First up, now I read this, I don't know if it's true. Is it true that paramedics in Australia have stopped asking patients who the Prime Minister is because it's no longer an accurate yardstick of mental health?
Yeah, look, I read that. I think that comes from a story from the previous coup, where the now fallen Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull took over from Tony Abbott. And I think a Queensland paramedic had said that he'd stopped doing it because someone said, I don't know, because I haven't read the paper this morning. So I think they've put the kibosh on that, and with good reason. I think you said that there were four prime ministers in the last 10 years. Actually, I think it's 6, and that's not counting the opposition leaders that have done. Yeah, so it started happening back in 2007. Kevin Rudd took over from John Howard. So there's been 6 or 7 changes in the last 10 years, and for the 25 years before that, Hala, there were 3 prime ministers. So something clicked about 10 years ago, and it's been a shambles.
So what's happened? What's provoked all this change? I mean, has there been one single event, or is it? I'm just trying to get my head around this.
Look, there's been an alignment of peculiar issues, and I think they're issues that you're experiencing over there and the Americans are experiencing. So there's social and cultural issues, and there's been a fracturing, I guess. There's been a division between edges of Australia that are just falling further and further apart on key issues, and for the ruling party, the Liberal coalition, that party's now prison for those. So the right wing of the party is just almost broken off and drifting towards New Zealand, and the centre cannot hold. So, and that's what's happened. The end of last month, we've now got our 30th Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, the former Treasurer. He somewhat unexpectedly became Australia's 30th Prime Minister, but I say unexpectedly, but the fact is he's the 7th PM in 10 years. And the ousted PM, Malcolm Turnbull, who, although a fiscal conservative, was seen as socially progressive. And he had done a number on Tony Abbott, the mad monk, who was Prime Minister back in 2015. And Tony Abbott was a conservative, and the Conservatives never recovered. I think psychologically they never recovered from Malcolm Turnbull coming in, taking over, and they've worked to remove him ever since. And that's what's happened most recently. You've seen far right of this party just been not even white-handing. They've just been undermining for so long, and they grabbed the Immigration Minister, Peter Dutton, as their right-wing avatar to take over. And so what happens, Harla, is the party asks for a spill, and it's a vote to see whether the leader's got confidence or not. They did a spill. The Conservatives miscalculated, didn't have the numbers for it, but it undermined Turnbull's authority enough for this guy, Scott Morrison, to become the consensus candidate. And lo and behold, he's done that. He's the new PM. But for the country, for the party, and for these individuals, nothing's changed. Okay. I mean, absolutely nothing's changed. The Conservatives are unsatisfied. Their man didn't get in. Turnbull can't believe it. The Australian people can't believe it. The only guys cheering are the opposition, who instead of getting a PM that's going to have a honeymoon period, they've got this guy who has sort of fallen off in the polls immediately. So it's more of the same for us, but hopefully hopefully this will be the end of it, and there'll be some calmer waters ahead.
Right. So let's just bring this back, because I mean, I'm not familiar with Australian politics at all. I stumbled on this because I think in my Twitter feed someone was talking about, God, have we got another prime minister already? Like, what's going on? Talk us through the just overall in politics in Australia. So in the UK, it's been a two-party system for a long period of time, although arguably that's fracturing as well. We've got, the Labour Party on the left, you have the Conservative Party on the right, and then you have Liberal Democrats and other small fringe almost parties. In Scotland, it's a bit more complex, of course. You have the Scottish National Party, plus Labour on the left, Conservatives on the right, and other smaller parties, Liberal Democrats and so on. But generally, it's defined by Conservatives on the right, Labour on the left. That's a system you see mirrored. The US has the Democrats on the left, Republicans on the right, and in France, Germany, and so on and so forth. What does the party system look like in Australia?
Look, I mean, firstly, we've inherited a lot of our political systems and the method of governments. Where constitutional monarchy, we've inherited all of that from the POMs.
That'd be the English. Now, I'm just providing translation here.
English, our good friends over in London. Now, look, speaking basically, the Liberals, the Conservatives were the party of the employers, and the Labor, the party of the employees. That's dumbing it down as roughly as I can. And historically, Australia's been a federation since 1901. We have 6 states, and we have a federal government that runs over that now. And our system of parliament is bicameral. We've got the House of Reps, we've got the Senate underneath. And what's happened is, and like you guys, we've got the National Party, which are, I guess, the representatives of the more rural parts of Australia, which are conservative, and they form a coalition with the Liberal Party, and that's what forms government. The problem has been, for the Liberal Party specifically, I mean, in the same way that Marine Le Pen has captured attention in France, we've seen it in Austria, we've seen it everywhere, where I think in the churn of modern media with this, I mean, it's not a 24-hour cycle anymore, it's an instant cycle. That creates an enormous amount of pressure on politicians. It doesn't just fracture parties, it fractures and alienates, and how can I say, it accentuates the differences, and media's followed that. So in Australia, let me sort of explain that the media is also taking some of the blame for what's been happening down here, and those differences have been accentuated. That Liberal Party, which was the party of business, it was the more socially conservative party. That party is being drained of its identity by a couple of key issues that they're losing votes on the right. So we've got, I don't know if you've ever come across this name before, Pauline Hanson.
Yes.
Who runs the One Nation Party. Now,
is she like your Nigel Farage?
Yes, but prettier. She ran a fish and shop. She was elected back in the day of John Howard, but it actually was a sign of things to come. Now, that party and other parties like it have come in representing issues on the right. And when you have this two-party system, the Liberal Party is not losing votes to the Labor Party, it's losing votes to these independent right-wing parties. And that's why you've got this very strong faction within the Liberal Party that when they have a candidate like Malcolm Turnbull, who's very much down the middle, but progressive on social ideas. For example, Australia became the 26th or 27th country to legalise same-sex marriage in December last year. Malcolm Turnbull championed that, but the right, the Christian right, and the far right in his party were irate about it, and that's why several months later you see events like this where, out of the blue, his following's not that bad. He's consistently ahead of the opposition leader Bill Shorten, but they've knifed him anyway.
Okay.
So, we're a two-party system like you, but I suspect like you and like other Western democracies, we're seeing our differences emphasised, and that's difficult for a politician to. It's a tough gig being a politician now.
It certainly is. But talk to us about the centre, Chris, because there does seem to be some similarities here. If you have certainly with societal issues driving this, and obviously with the changing face of the media now as well, we can understand how there is this drift further to the left for one part of society, a drift further to the right in parties like Pauline Hanson's One Nation, or we're seeing things like UKIP and the various permutations that party's taking on here. What's happening with the Australian centre?
Well, one of the issues for both parties is that they are just left or right of centre, and it's the factions within them that are splitting, and I suspect that's part of why we've seen this coup d'état culture over the last 10 years make itself felt. I think it might be easier, Howard, to try and nail down what are the major issues down here.
Okay.
And I'm sure that they'll be reflected in what's happening over there too. But immigration, obviously, is a key issue for us down here. The new Prime Minister Scott Morrison was the immigration minister. So we have a lot of boats that came in, and he came up with the Stop the Boats policy, and there's bipartisan support for that. In fact, the Labor government came in under Julia Gillard and then established offshore detention centres. So we have detention centres for refugees that come in, and if they make it to the country, then we put them in very tough setups like Nauru, Papua New Guinea, and there's broad consensus for these. So immigration is a key one. The issue that probably split this particular government was climate change. We cannot get consensus here on climate change, even though we're the driest country in the world. And Turnbull was keen to set an emissions scheme up, and his conservative faction have blocked that at every corner. So these issues, otherwise, I mean, we've had 104 consecutive quarters of growth in Australia, and I think that even outstrips the Dutch in terms of solid economics. So, we're not falling apart down here. People are doing pretty well. We're a fairly prosperous country, and the reasons for such carnage politically are not out of social desperation. It's the political class that's doing it to itself, and the outcome is that we don't get resolution on any of these issues. No resolution on issues that matter to Australians.
In terms of another thing that I found out about the Parliament, which I thought was quite interesting, and I wondered if this is contributing in some way to the situation down there. Your Parliament's only run for 3 years.
That's
which is how can you get anything done? I mean, because I'm looking at certainly in terms of our parliaments. I mean, you can barely get our policy signed off in 2.5 years. How do you get anything done in 3 years?
Yeah, no. I don't know if we get a lot done, to be honest. The 3-year cycle, it might be the shortest, I think, out of all the democratic countries that I know of. One of the upshots of that is, especially in the age of social media, politicians are living on a kind of fight or flight adrenaline, because it's always election time. It's always around the corner. And since 2007, when this kind of political assassinating sort of came into fashion, I think they also realised how bloody easy it was, because having an election is hard. A general election, you've got to work, you've got to talk to everyone, you've got to try and win votes. Whereas you have a spill, you just kind of say, listen, are there 50% of us that are unhappy? Great, let's chop and change. So that's why we've been getting this as well, because it's so easy to do, and having an election is so bloody hard.
Yeah. How are the Australian public reacting to this? Because certainly one of the things which I guess, I'm just speaking from my perspective here, but we've seen an awful lot of elections. We've had a fair bit of Brexity things going on. We've had governments come and go on the brink of collapse. The threat of another election looms large, and people are just sick of it. The general feeling here is that people are just sick of. I personally am sick of having to vote for stuff. It's like I don't know how many more times I can be asked the most important question of my life. It just keeps coming round. It keeps coming round. How are Australian people? How did they react to this? Your government's changing constantly. Whether or not you have to vote them in or not. I mean, how are people reacting to that?
I don't want to whinge more than I can, but it's worse for us, man, because voting is compulsory here in Australia, and that is also being attributed to some of the problems we're getting, because there's sort of 18. The suggestion is there's 18 or 20% that are voting from the hip, and it's making the elections even more skewed. So you've got these waves of elections coming in, people coming in, they don't know who they're voting for. So I'd say that when Malcolm Turnbull did Tony Abbott in 2015, there was a lot of throwing up of hands, and people said, "Bugger this." This time round, we've almost, we've jumped the shark. People are taking it with a bit of humour. If you look at it too hard and if you dwell on it, you get kind of depressed, and it's a little bit hard to swallow. But there seems to have been a bit more humour with it. Like where our friends over in New Zealand started sending us tweets and things saying, "Do you want us to send in the troops until democracy is restored?" These kind of things. So, and
have you taken them up on their offer?
Mate, if their army's anything like their rugby team, we do them out. Um, but they've got, I mean, they've got again, they show us up pretty well, the Kiwis. They've got their new prime minister. I don't know if you've seen Jacinta Ardern.
Yes.
She's just been the first prime minister to have a baby in office, and you know, they're steady goes, and we're falling down. So yeah, look, we're taking it as best we can, but look, having said that, Harley, yeah, there's fury. You can imagine there's consternation and fury, but we're kind of used to it. And I mean, that's perhaps the danger, you know. We're so used to it now, where, you know, we kind of expect it.
There's one more thing I want to, I just want to ask you about, and then I'm going to let you get back. But this is a different kind of political crisis you guys had. Am I mistaken? Where a lot of your elected representatives were facing, were having to leave Parliament because they weren't Australian.
Yeah. So
tell me, we'll let that plane pass first.
Can you guys get that? We don't even hear it now.
I live in Glasgow. I get police cars going past my window all the time, so it's fine. We're cool.
All right. So look, this is just a constitutional quirk. Going back many years, and I'm trying to remember if it was Section 44A of the Constitution, or was it 22A? Basically, one of these sections that says you have to renege on your if you come from if you're a citizen of another country, you have to renege on that citizenship and become Australian. But of course, Australian, we're all from another country.
Yes.
And so, you know, when these things, and of course the parties have to be across their due diligence when they nominate someone for Parliament, right? I mean, you know, they need to be able to cross these things. They weren't across these things. No one was across these things. You had the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, who's a Kiwi, and so it went to the High Court, and they axed about 12, a bunch of these guys, but most significantly, Barnaby Joyce, who had sat there for a few months lambasting everyone for being foreigners, and then eventually they said, actually, now that I think about it, I'm a Kiwi. So he was out. That wasn't so much a drama. He did end up fathering a child from his chief of staff a few months later, so that really made Section 22A look pretty soft afterwards.
This is amazing. I think your politics is a lot more interesting than ours, and certainly a lot more fun.
Mate, we've got some interesting characters. There's a couple of these guys that you wouldn't credit that they could actually be. They make Donald Trump look pretty sane. Let me say that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, then, just quickly, Chris, do you think your system needs fixing? Then, I mean, do you think the Australian political system needs changing, or does this just show you as you said, the country's doing well, it's all very stable? Is this? Does everything's functioning well despite all this upheaval? Is this just show you how stable your system is? Which side of the argument would you come down on?
Oh, look. For me personally, I think that what's the point in having a democracy if you've got a back door where these guys can skip the rest of us and go to a closed door room and choose the prime minister themselves? I think that's bollocks. And I'm not the only one. But to fix it, all you need to do is for the two major parties to change the rules around the spill. It doesn't have to be a constitutional thing. It doesn't have to be a government thing. All you've got to do is go to the parties and say, listen, if you want to change the leader, you're going to have to get over, because at the moment it's 50 or so percent. The Labor opposition have done it and changed it so that it's harder. The Liberal Party has to do it as well, but I don't know if there's political stomach for it because, again, it's the hard right that's calling the shots in the government, and Malcolm Turnbull couldn't figure it out, and I don't know if I can either. So the system's okay, but the parties themselves can sort it out. The only thing I'd add to it, Harla, is you and I were in China, and you saw what a centralised, non-democratic government can do when they make decisions. They say, bang, 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 we're done, off we go. Whereas I think the Western democracies, Australia is a good example, Europe, you see a lot of it, we are dilly-dallying with this nonsense. And the lack of government used to be about decision-making, it used to be about deliberating, and now it's turning into spectacle, and that's a problem.
Indeed. Is democracy overrated? Discuss. That's a topic, I think, for another podcast. You can tell when people have been spending too long in China, and this is what comes out over the dinner table.
I know. Stop me from defending China.
Oh gosh, well, we've been there too long, Chris. Anyway, listen, thank you so much. This was great. I've learned so much about the Australian system. I'm sure everyone listening has as well. Sorry for that. There's been a couple of sound issues. I'm sorry about that, but it has been great hearing from you. Just before we let you get back to your day, Chris, is there anything that if there's one thing people take away from this discussion, what would it be? What would you want people to take away from our chat today?
Look, I think that I'm hoping that people are becoming more aware of the divisions in the way we are approaching our issues now, and how we are, as a society, as a country, as a group, how we're being pulled away from each other, and it's showing itself up in a lot of strange things. For example, we're churning our prime ministers here, and needs to be people need to keep an eye on it. People need to be watching what the hell is going on.
This sounds extra dramatic with the plane in the background, but no, engage in your democracy, pay attention to how it's impacting on wider societies. I think that's a lesson not just for Australia, but also for democracies all around the world. Chris, thank you so much for chatting with us today. If people want to hear more about the work Chris does, he's a published journalist in Australia, working with the AIP, but also publishes frequently in the national press. So Christian Edwards, do search for him there. And we can get in touch with you as well by email, edwards.christian@gmail.com. On Twitter as well, but not as prolific as perhaps myself. Chris, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and we'll hope to hear from you again soon.
Yeah, great. Have a great day over there.
Angie, thank you. Thanks very much for listening to us on the Outwith podcast. We'll be back with you again next week.